Hi everyone, and welcome to another real-time coloring video. If you want to see the card making part of this, it will be linked in the description down below, at the end of the video and up in the right corner. But let's jump into the coloring. So the image I'm using today is called Bookworm Elora, and as the coloring challenge over at Make It Crafty this month is skin, I wanted to give you another different skin color. So the skin today, I looked at the image and I felt like she wanted to be a Spanish, some kind of that tone. So I googled some images again, and then I picked up my Copics and I did a little bit of a test here and there, and then I found this might actually be the colors I wanted to use. So I started off with E74 to do my darkest shadows, and this is because it has a little bit of a purplish undertone and it's kind of a dark color, and I thought that would be perfect for the shadows. And I'm starting with her legs. I'm testing something new. I got the comment that maybe if I could zoom in a little bit more on what I'm coloring, and I thought that because this image was the size it was, I thought, well, I split her in half and I will do the legs and shoes, and then I will do the torso in like different shots. So I hope this works out. For the legs, I'm thinking about having the kind of light from the upper right corner, and therefore I'm putting most of the weight of the shadows on the left lower side. But I'm also adding a little bit of shadow in the corner of her knee and a little bit up on her right thigh, and this is to make the legs a little bit rounder. And if you want to learn how to really tone legs or tone body with your Copics, I really recommend the skin toning ebook tutorial that Zoe over at Make It Crafty has created. It is a wonderful ebook, and it has taught me a lot. I do go back to it now and again to kind of figuring out how to put things, where to put shadows and stuff like that. But I do feel that my knees have become the bee's knees. I'm very proud of my knees. It was one of those parts of the legs that I always got wrong, but I feel like I got it right this time. So back to the color scheme, I use a combination of 70s, 30s and a 50. And how I choose the specific different colors is that when I'm looking for my darkest shadow, I'm looking for something that is toward purple or blue, because shadows have a tendency to be more purple or blue. Then I choose one or two mid-tones, and this is basically the color that I think the skin is from the beginning. And then I choose a highlight, and the highlight will have a little bit more of kind of yellow or pink. It all depends on which skin color you are looking for, but most of the skin colors, especially if they are tanned, have a slightly yellowish undertone, while if it's as pale as I am, it can actually have a little bit of a pink undertone when it comes to the highlights. So that is how I think when I choose the colors, and then I try them out on a separate paper to see if they blend well. So now we come to the skin, to the upper part, and I'm actually starting off by just figuring out where I want to put my shadows with a very light color, even lighter than the ones I'm going to be as my lightest. And I'm doing that because I want to make sure that I'm putting all of the shadows in the right place, and I want to start with the darkest color. I don't want too many layers, especially when I'm working in detailed areas. The more layers you put on, the less of the details will be seen, because you will be kind of blending over your details. So therefore I want to do a very simpler thing, and then I always start with my darker color, because then I just go on with a pen that I need to blend it out as the next pen, and so on. And therefore I can kind of choose to do one layer. Then I'm adding here with the E74 all the shadows. I try not to add too many shadows. I rather have too little shadows to begin with than too many shadows, because you can always add more, but you can't really remove them. I then go over with the E35. The E35 is kind of a caramel brown, a darker caramel brown, which I thought would be a perfect secondary shadow or darker mid-tone for the skin color that I was after. I wanted to give her this like brown Mediterranean skin color, like someone who spent a lot of time in the sun. I start off by just doing the face. I don't want to add too many details in too many places at once, because it's easier to blend colors if you blend them when they are wet, so before they dry. And alcohol dries by evaporating, and it takes a little time, and if you do work in smaller areas, it doesn't have time to evaporate, and you can get an easier blend, because it will actually help you with your blends if you keep it moist. But that doesn't mean that you should add water to it, because alcohol pens are alcohol based. Water will do nothing for them. It is the alcohol that will do something for them. But yeah, I talked about it the last time. Using your blender pen or using like alcohol to moisten your paper out will only make it harder to get an even layer. So just by working in smaller areas, you will be able to keep your paper very wet and therefore easier to blend with. So I'm here on my lightest pen, and I'm actually going over the whole area, the whole face and the whole neck with this pen directly. I am going to do a couple of different layers around the shadows, and she will end up being a little bit darker in her face. But this is more because I figured out that I needed a little bit more shadows between her eyes, both because of the bump, but also because the glasses will actually leave a little bit of a shadow. And because her head is tilted a little bit, she will have a deeper shadow on her left side of her nose. So I'm trying to enhance that also to make it a little bit more dimensional, the whole face. Also went in a little bit more with the super darkest, but I'm adding very teeny tiny little, and I kind of just decided to not add more afterwards, because she was starting, you could see that on her left face, it started to get a little bit too dark. And then I'm just blending it out. Again, I'm going from dark to light when blending, because you will always want to blend a dark pen with a lighter pen. You don't blend a light pen with a darker pen, because it don't really gonna blend. Or what you're gonna do is you're gonna get a more of a streaky appearance, and that is because the lighter pen, because it has more alcohol, it will help you to push down the darker pigment into the paper, and that is why you get a blend, a good blend. But yeah, when I do faces, I usually leave a teeny tiny little white line at the edge of her jaw, like all down her cheeks and jaw, because that will help her head to stand out to any kind of hair. It will also, it is actually something called a reflective light or a rim light. Basically, it's where the light have reflected from clothing or environment and reflecting back up on the face. But it really helps to separate the different parts of the image and make them stand out a little bit, and reduce muddiness when you're working with darker colors. So now we're going to go in with the arms, and as you see, I leave a little bit of a lighter area at the corner of her elbow, and that is because your elbow will automatically be a bit lighter, and this will, you will have shadows around your elbow because you have a lot of bone protrusions and stuff, and just leaving that little round thing will give the effect like you have taken in consideration all the bones, even if you haven't. I also just add, as you see, I don't add shadows all along the edge when I go in with the darkest color. Instead, I add it where it should be darkest, and then just carefully flick out the lines so they get thinner towards where the shadow would be lighter, and sometimes I don't connect them. And that will also help you to get a proper dimension, because shadows aren't straight. They kind of bend and move, and you kind of want to add it a little bit. And as you see, when I go in with the next to darkest color, I add I added like triangles. So where I added the absolute darkest colors, I add a little bit of a triangle around it when I'm blending it, to again give it a more of an organic shadow than I had if I just would do straight. It kind of moves with your arm and how your arm will bend. And then when I've gone through all the 3 dark colors, I'm going in with the E53 and just blending those out. It's not a perfect blend between the pens, but it is a pretty good blend. I kind of like the blend. And I like the skin color in the end. I think she looked pretty dark. Now the fun thing is, you will see, because I'm adding dark hair, the shadowing looks kind of stark here, but when she have gotten her dark hair and her clothing, the shadow actually will look a lot lighter, and that is because when you have color around someone or around an area, that color will affect how you perceive the rest of the colors. So for the finishing part of the skin, I always add a little bit of pink, and before I usually just used a little bit of pink on her cheeks, but I've started to add a little bit of pink on her nose, on her fingers, on her elbows. I don't think I added anything on the knees because I didn't think you would see the knees in this shot, and I thought I would do it later and I didn't. But I'm adding a little bit of pink. I'm using R32 and R30, and R32 is pretty a bold pink, and because I want it to blend very, very good, I have both of the pens uncapped and go very fast over the R32, so it doesn't have time to dry at all, because when you let it dry a little bit, it will actually be harder to blend, and it will leave edges that you don't have when you have the wet ink as it is. I did also use some B63 in her eyes to make it a little bit more dimensional, and some of the R32 on her lips to get a little bit of a redder lip, a little bit more a more kind of natural lip, because our lips are usually a little bit redder than the rest of our skin. Go through a couple of greens to add to her eyes, and then go into her hair. And by the way, if you want to know how I colored her eyes, I do have a video on how to color eyes, where I go through a whole bunch of different eyes from different Make It Crafty characters and different ways to color those kind of eyes. So there, it's just search for coloring eyes or just eyes on my channel and you will find it. So for her hair, I am starting off with a pretty light gray, and she's not gonna have gray hair, she's gonna have like a darker sort of black brown with a slightly gray undertone. When you work with black hair, because that is what I'm doing, I'm giving her black hair, what you want to know is that you do need the contrast in it. You need to use lighter colors to be able to then see the different strands and such, and to give dimension. If you just would go in with pure black right through it, you would lose any kind of detail and any kind of dimension. And in my case, I usually, if I do black with grays, I usually use a 6 as my lightest color. But if you really want to be adventurous, you could even go up to a 4, but then you would want to have very, very little highlights where the 4 is. But I usually go to a 6. When I do black, I usually use either the C's or the warm grays. The warm grays have a very brown undertone, so that will help the hair to look like it's more a brown black than a bluish black. When I work with my C's, I actually usually use a blue color as the lightest shadow, or a blue in combination with the C6. So I do the blue and then I do the C6 on top of it to get that extra blue for those highlights, to get them to pop and to make the hair look like it's blue. But here I'm using the warm grays. So what I've done here is I'm going in with the number 4 to add all the darkest shadows, because it's easier to see how they work when you have a color that is closer to white when you're doing it. When you start going in with the black, you will get such a high contrast between the white and the black that you won't see how the colors will flow into each other, or it will be harder for your eye to or your brain to fill in the blanks, sort of. So therefore I usually, when I do hair, I do go in with a lighter color, or the lightest of the tone that I have for the hair, just to give it figuring out where to put all the shadows that I wanted. So I'm starting off with 110, which is special black. Now black comes in 2 colors, 110 and 100, and they do have a different shade. They are not the same, they are not equal, but they're very, very, very similar. So you can use any of them in basically any combination. So you don't have to get both of them. In my case, I bought all my pens through the 72 pen sets. I saved up and then I got one, and then I saved up and I got a second, and then I saved up and got a third, and it took me a couple of years to get all the pens, but that was how I got my full collection. And therefore I do have all the pens, because I didn't choose specific ones when I did it, I just took the whole sets. So I kind of just alternate with which pen that I'm using, and today I'm using the 110 because that was the pen I picked up. And what I'm doing here is I'm just going over those areas, those darkest areas, and adding the color. I am thinking about or things that I'm thinking about when I'm adding the color is to give the hair strand a rim light. Every strand gets its own rim light in this case. That will also help you to get a stranded effect on your hair when you're coloring it black. So I kind of not trying to make it look like real hair. I'm trying to make it look like hair somewhat. So every strand gets a little bit of a rim light on both sides of it, which will then be filled in with either the tones coming out or the lightest tone. It all depends on, like with the shadow, where I was with my pen right now, where you have a kind of a shadow because you have a bend, then I probably would go over that rim light with the next coming color when I'm elongating and widening that kind of arrow-like, or yeah, the arrow-like edge. But if it's just the strand itself, I try to keep the rim line the whole strand, just to give it different kind of dimensions. And you will learn, it will take a while, but when you are coloring the hair, you will learn where you will put what. You will kind of see that, okay, now when I added the color this way, I have a hard time seeing where this specific strand is. So this time maybe I should just have kept that rim light the whole way. And when you do it at another place, you see, oh, this is the other way, and I probably should have put the rim light on the other way. So it's a thing you learn by doing. A lot of coloring is that way, that you can watch a lot of YouTube videos to figure out how someone places the colors, how they do stuff. But it's not until you try it yourself that things will kind of click, and you will see that, oh, she put the color this way, and therefore this is the effect that you will get. And bit by bit you will learn how to more and more add different colors. So I'm moving on to color to W10. So all of our hair is the 110 special black, and then the warm grays, the 10, the 8, and the 6. When you are coloring with the grays, all of the grays, working in increments of 2 is the easiest way, because if you would do every pen, you would work, you don't have to use every pen, you will get a good blend with every other pen, and therefore it will actually be quicker to color with every other pen. However, you will get a little bit of a different effect depending on using the even or the uneven pens, but you only need one pair of them. So if you buy your pen by pen, I do recommend to buy either the even pens or the uneven pens, but you really don't need both of them. I love all my grays, but I would recommend, if you are starting out, buy the cools and the warms in either the even or the uneven numbers, and then you have colors to play with for so long time. Working only with grays are an awesome way to understand how shadow works, but it can also give you really cool effects. So what I'm doing with the W10 is that I'm kind of making the little arrows that I have both longer and a little bit wider. Still trying to leave that little light, and it looks a little bit like a mess, and it's gonna look even messier. It's not until you go in with your lightest color and blend that out that you will see how the hair comes together, because when working with a dark hair, the white highlights have too high of a contrast, so your brain will not automatically fill in the blanks it will feel like it's a little bit muddy. If you want white highlights, I do recommend buying something like a white gesso or a white acrylic ink and add those white lines back over when you have finished the image, because then you also will have the complete hair and you can kind of feel where you want an extra shine in the hair if you want to add an extra shine. So tips for this is the next to last color, so this is my medium color. I have a tendency to use 4 or 5 colors when I color, and this is because I like having 2 mediums. It helps me blend and it helps me place the colors. You don't really need them, you can use 3. I wouldn't recommend 2, because then you wouldn't have a separate highlight or a separate shadow. You would want 3. You want a medium, which is kind of the tone that you're after, and then a dark, which is the shadows, and a highlight, that is the highlights. I usually use 4, because then I have 1 medium that will bridge the shadows, and then I have 1 medium that would bridge the highlights. This will help me actually work with a little bit of higher contrast in my images and get them to be a little bit more dimensional, because it's the contrast that will give you your dimension and kind of getting that 3D effect on your creations. But here I'm going in with the V8 and the W8. And what I'm doing here is that I'm filling in everything that isn't a highlight. And that is how I think about it when I'm adding my last medium tone, is that I'm going to fill in everything except the things I want to have a highlight, a rim light. That is going to be the rim light. And when you work with high contrast like I do here, it can be harder to see which should be the highlight. But you learn in the end. You learn, and you get to work. If you work a lot with color, bit by bit, you learn how to trick your brain to see it. A few ways to do it if you have a hard time with the highlight is to kind of squeeze your eyes a little bit so your image comes out of focus. And there you can kind of see a little bit better. Still, with this high contrast, it can be hard to see anyhow, but it helps to put that a little bit in out of focus to see where everything is, because that then you see what is what you will be seeing, or what kind of helps push out things. I don't know how to explain this. I'm trying though. I do try. Also, when going in with the lightest color, that is when I try to figure out which kind of curlicues is a curlicue and which should be not a curlicue. And you can see in a couple of places in the hair where I actually accidentally have colored an area that shouldn't be a curlicue. But I do use, because I only used the lighter tone there, I kind of can go in with the colorless blender and kind of try to push away some of that color so that it looks a little less like I shadowed in the wrong thing. But yeah. Another thing when you are doing any kind of blend, sometimes you do really need to go over the whole thing, but sometimes when you are going over the whole thing, try to be a little bit lighter when you're going over the darker parts with a lighter pen. So I try to put down a good amount of ink on the highlights, but then when I'm blending in it, I'm kind of reducing the pressure towards the darker parts, because I don't want to push the darker too much into the paper. Yeah, So that is the hair done and finished. So then we're gonna go in and do the dress. And I wanted to have like a deep orangey color. And when I went through the different pens, the different browns that I was looking at, they all were more towards like a reddish tone, a purplish reddish tone, than orange reddish tone. So what I decided to do was to base my whole dress with the YR18, which is a very dark color, so she's gonna have a pretty dark dress. That's kind of the idea behind it. So I'm going in with the YR18 to give that orange base tone, and I'm going to blend over the YR18, and then I'm gonna, when I'm blended with all the browns, I'm going back in with the YR18 to bring some of that orange back, and then I'm going back in the brown, and vice versa, because the YR18 is a little bit lighter, it will push the darkness into the paper. So then I have to add a little bit more of the browns to give the contrast I want, and then I have to add a little bit more of the YR18. So it's kind of working bit by bit, back and forward, until you figure out that you feel that your contrast is where you want your contrast to be. But I'm starting off with the YR18 and filling it all out, and then I'm going in with the E59. The E is actually a pretty red tone, but it's also a pretty dark tone. But because it's a red tone, it will blend easier towards the orange. When you are working with pens from different color families, that is a very good thing to think about, is that if you do a warm tone and a cold tone, they will have a harder time to blend. So if you have a pink and a blue, for example, they be very hard to blend. But if you go in with a purple in between, that purple will help it blend, because it is in the middle of the families. It's a little bit of red and a little bit of blue. For the dress, I'm going in where all the folds are, kind of thinking about how would the dress fall, what are the different kind of shadows that I'm adding. I'm also adding a little bit of shadow underneath her bosom to make it look a little bit more like a bosom. Then I'm going in with the E57. The E57 is not as red as the E59. It's a more of a bronze tone, but it does blend the E59 pretty nicely, and it's not too dark, so the orange will be, you will see the orange through it pretty good. So this is why I chose it, because I thought it would layer nicely. Also, all of these color combinations that I do, I have separate paper of the same cardstock. I'm using the Make It Colorful cardstock when I'm doing my Copic coloring. So I have a separate sheet of paper beside me where I try all my color combinations before I put them onto my paper. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I'm coloring the books, because that was also an adventure. But here I'm going in with the 23 and blending that last out. And I'm getting this beautiful kind of brown orange color. I really liked it. However, I needed to have a little bit more depth. I felt it was a little bit too little of a contrast. So I'm going to go over everything again. So I'm shadowing again with the 59, and I'm not shadowing the line, the dress line. What I'm doing is I'm giving that shadow on that side a little bit of a rim light, because I wanted her dress to stand out towards her hair, and the darker the dress is, the less it will stand out. So I'm giving a rim light on both sides of the dress, and as you see here, I'm actually adding a little bit extra of that shadow on the other side of the that line, or the, I don't know what it's called, the seam that you have in the middle, because I wanted to show that I'm shadowing the whole dress that way. I also added a little bit of shadow on her left side to kind of just make her hip a little bit more rounded, again with a little bit of a rim light, helping it stand out against the hair. Then I'm going in with the E57 and blending all the E59 out as much as possible, looking at it, trying to see which shadows that I don't want to be too bright and which shadows I want to make pop. Kind of just adding shadow where I needed to hide away a little bit, and then not adding shadows where it's going to be lighter. And to finish it off, I'm going in with the YR18 to just add an extra layer of orange to make the orange pop a little bit extra out of that. And it was already pretty dark, so all it does, it just makes it a little bit more towards the red tone. So moving on to the shoes. Again, I'm going in with the YR18 and trying to just base the shoe out. I will go in with the colorless blender and remove some of the ink that I colored on the outside of the line, because that happens. And when I was coloring this, I kept thinking about bleeding, because I was adding quite a substantial amount of inks both on the dress and the shoes. But I kind of figured that there is one thing that I do very often when I color that I don't really think about until I really think about it. And that is, when I color, both I do this rim light thing, so then you will automatically not color that much towards the edge of the image. I will leave that edge until I do the finish layer, but also I do not put my nib right up against the black line. I usually do it just a sliver inside of the lines, because the ink can kind of by itself just seep a little bit that last piece, and it has become automatic thing for me. That is how I color everything, not adding it too close to the edge. This will also help when you are if you are printing and your printer and you do an ink print, because most inks doesn't work with Copics. Just a warning, most inks doesn't work with Copics. Previously I've been using a laser printer because that will work with the Copics, but I do use a Epson printer with the Durabright inks. And it's very important that when you are refilling the inks, you buy the Durabright inks if you are going to do the Copic coloring. Any kind of knockoff doesn't work. It is the Durabright ink that have this specific way of how it's set up, that it works both with watercoloring but also with the Copics, and I really like it. And one other thing I like about having a inkjet printer with color is that I can actually print it in a lighter tone or in a brown tone to get cool effects for my images. I'm giving those little metallic zipper thingies some metal color, and this is two other different ways you can color them if you don't have the gesso that I will be using for the rest of the details. And that is first a gel pen, a metallic gel pen, and the other one is just like a golden marker of some sort that I just added a little bit of the color onto my block to then pick it up with a brush, which had a much finer nib, so it was a little bit easier to color with it. So this is where even though I did add all of this colors next to and did a really nice swatch, because I didn't color it at the edge, direct edge of the color, I didn't see that how much the colors would work towards each other, and how the books would just disappear and really feel out of place in that red color. So I went over it first with the wire 18, which I ended up not really feeling that it had enough contrast between the dress and the reds. Then I went in with the E19, and I'm actually removing the shadow that I did for her arm, because the book started to look like they were bent. So I tried to work with as little shadow as possible on the books, just a little bit under her arm, but not much, just keeping that because I didn't want the books to look like they were bent. And then I just kept on layering colors and layering colors and layering colors, and in the end the E27, I felt that I can't go darker, just adding a little color to her arm there that I realized I had missed, but I couldn't go darker, but they were still lost in her arms. This is when I brought my little gesso, or no, gesso, gouache. This is gouache. This is the Winsor & Newton Designers Gouache. It is in the color golden. And gouache is a watercolor medium. So it is a water-based medium, but it is a opaque water-based medium, so it's not see-through. First of all, I wouldn't recommend coloring over it. You never know how the color will react, if it will add residue on your nibs or anything, so I'm not recommending that, and I'm not coloring over it. I kind of added this as the last thing. I was even thinking about printing out her new and just cutting out the books and adding other books on top. But this I ended up looking pretty good. What I'm doing here is I'm first coloring in the page sides with golden. You've probably seen like these old leather-bound books that have like golden lining. A lot of old Bibles have the golden lining on the page, so when you see the book closed, it looks like it's just a golden thing. Then I decided that I wanted to add some details to make those books pop a little bit extra, and many of these kind of old leather-bound books have kind of gold corners, either around the corners to kind of protect the corners, or just golden writing or pressed in things on in the corners. So this is how I add it. I have added a little bit of water to the gouache so that it is a little bit more, isn't as creamy as it is, because it's quite creamy when it comes out of the tube. And you really don't need much of this gouache. You can use very, very little and come a very long way. So even though it's a little bit towards the expensive side, you can have your gouache for a very long time. And you can use it for a lot of things. So that is something I really like. So when I finished off the details on the book, I kind of figured that, yeah, I'm gonna add a lot of more golden details to her, but I need to finish the Copic coloring. So I'm going in with the YR27, which is kind of a mustardy color scheme. I'm gonna use the 27, the 24, and the 21. I am going in with the 23 at one point and realizing that it's way too close to the 24. Or no, it's way too close to the 24. So I didn't want the 23 in the mix. Also, the 23 is a little bit more towards the dirty than the rest of the YRs. It's a way you can switch it out. Instead of using the 24, you can use the 23, and then you won't give as a bright mustardy color. You will get a little bit more of a muddy color. So here I am just adding some shadows, adding some dimension to the lines with the 24 here, going back in with the 27 to add a little bit more harshness to that line. So a little bit, you go back and forth, adding. Here is when I start adding the 23, and this is where I realize how close it is to the 24, and decide that, yeah, I'm not gonna use it at all. I don't want it there. So I'm keeping the place where it is because it wasn't that big of a difference, but I'm not gonna add it to any other place on the character. And after going in with the first layer, I'm going in with the other colors. I think, yes. I'm going in with the other colors again, and then I'm going to go in with the wire 21 as a second layer because I felt it was way too light. And tip when you want to do double layers is this is where you want your image to dry, because if you're going in on a wet area, it won't layer as good as if you go over a dark area or a dry area, because then the pigment will kind of layer better. It won't seep into the paper as quickly, and therefore you will get a darker layer. Then I'm going in with the same colors for our glasses, and this is because I don't want to add more colors to this image. I want to keep the color scheme as it is. That is kind of what I feel important when I work with my images, is that I keep having reduced color schemes. I usually have a tendency to pick a couple of neutrals and 1 to 2 pop of colors. That's how I usually work. Here you have the green in her eyes, making you really see her eyes. This is one of the first things you see when you see the character. And then you have the red for her dress, and to make you look at that part. And then the skin and the hair is kind of the third part you see. So to finish off the coloring of all the image, I'm going to add more of the gouache, mixing it with a little bit of water and using a 0 brush. This has a very thin line on it, or a thin brush nib on it. So I'm using that to add all of the gouache. I have added some shadowing on some parts of her jewelry, but this is a very opaque color and you will not see those shadows at all, so you really don't need. The only thing is you might tint the golden a little bit by adding a color underneath. So if you are doing a gold, maybe you want to start coloring it with a yellow color of some sort. But one of the things is that if you miss with the brush in a little corner, if you have based it with a color that is close, a Copic color that is close, you will not see that you have missed to color with that color. So yeah. that is almost everything done. Yeah, there's one thing left that you might have noticed, that I noticed after adding the gouache. That is her eyebrows. I had forgot to add her eyebrows, so I'm going in with the W10, so not the black but the next to darkest color, and I add her eyebrows, and there she is done. I hope you liked the video. If you do, please thumbs it up. If you have any questions, just comment down below, and if you want to see more videos like this, just hit that subscribe button. And as usual, all the materials that I have used will be linked in the description down below, so you can just push a link there and you can find different stores that carry those supplies. So yeah, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye!